In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, where the air is thin and hope even thinner, prejudice can be as deadly as enemy fire. When seasoned Navy SEALs first laid eyes on the 5 feet 2 inches soldier assigned to their high-risk mission, their reactions ranged from disbelief to outright dismissal. "No damn chance," echoed through their ranks as they questioned how someone who barely reached their shoulders could survive what lay ahead. But, in the crucible of combat, where character is forged and legends are born, this petite warrior would rewrite every assumption they held. What happened next in those treacherous peaks would not only save a life but challenge everything these elite warriors thought they knew about strength, courage, and what it truly means to be a soldier. This is the story of how a woman who was never supposed to be there became the hero nobody saw coming, and how 8 miles of pure hell would transform doubt into respect, skepticism into admiration, and a rescue mission into a testament of human will that would echo through military history forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty courtyard of Forward Operating Base Chapman as Sergeant First Class Maria Santos adjusted her gear one final time. At just 26 years old, she had already earned a reputation as one of the Army's most reliable combat medics, but today felt different. Today, she was about to step into a world that had never truly welcomed women like her. The mission briefing had been straightforward enough. Intelligence indicated that a high-value Taliban commander was operating from a compound deep in the Hindu Kush Mountains. The terrain was brutal, the enemy well entrenched, and the window of opportunity narrow. It was exactly the type of operation that Navy SEAL Team 6 lived for, except this time, they wouldn't be going in alone. Maria had been specifically requested for this mission due to her unique combination of medical expertise and mountain warfare training. Her commanding officer, Colonel James Mitchell, had fought hard to get her assigned to the operation, knowing that her skills could mean the difference between life and death if things went sideways. But, as she made her way toward the briefing tent, Maria could feel the weight of 100 skeptical stares following her every step. The tent was thick with tension when she entered. 12 of the Navy's most elite warriors sat around a tactical map, their faces bearing the weathered marks of countless operations. At the head of the table stood Lieutenant Commander David Hawk Harrison, a man whose reputation preceded him even in special operations circles. His steel-gray eyes swept over Maria as she found her seat, and she could practically hear his thoughts. "Gentlemen," Hawk began, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had led soldiers through hell and back, "we have our final team member." He gestured toward Maria without enthusiasm. "Sergeant Santos will be our combat medic for this operation." The silence that followed was deafening. Maria had expected this reaction, but it still stung. She had spent years proving herself in a male-dominated field, yet here she was, once again facing the same doubtful expressions she had encountered since day one of her military career. Petty Officer First Class Jake Bulldog Morrison was the first to speak. A massive man with arms like tree trunks and a voice that sounded like gravel in a cement mixer, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "No damn chance," he said, his words cutting through the air like a blade. "With all due respect, sir, we're talking about a 12-hour insertion through some of the most hostile terrain on the planet. This isn't a place for—" "For what, Petty Officer?" Maria interrupted, her voice steady but firm. She had learned long ago that silence in the face of prejudice was often mistaken for agreement. Bulldog's face reddened slightly. "Look, nothing personal, but you're what, 5'2"? 120 pounds? These mountains will eat you alive before we even make contact with the enemy." Chief Petty Officer Marcus Stone Williams, a quiet man whose calm demeanor masked a fierce intelligence, studied Maria carefully. "The insertion point is at 9,000 feet, he said slowly. "From there, we'll be moving through terrain that would challenge a mountain goat. Are you sure you can handle the physical demands?" Maria had faced this question countless times throughout her career. She stood up slowly, her small frame somehow commanding attention despite her size. "I've completed the same mountain warfare course that half of you have," she said, her voice carrying a confidence born of experience. "I've been on 14 combat deployments, including 3 in these exact mountains. I've treated wounds under fire, carried wounded soldiers to safety, and never once failed to complete a mission." The room remained silent, but Maria could see the subtle shift in some of their expressions. Respect was something that had to be earned in this brotherhood, and she was prepared to do whatever it took. Hawk cleared his throat and continued with the briefing. "The target is here," he said, pointing to a spot on the map where several valleys converged. "Intelligence suggests Ahmad Pasha has been using this location as a staging area for attacks on coalition forces. Our job is to go in, capture or eliminate the target, and gather any intelligence we can find. As the briefing continued, Maria studied each member of the team. There was Tommy Ghostchen, a sniper whose accuracy was legendary even among SEALs. His quiet confidence suggested he was reserving judgment about her presence. Then, there was Rick Diesel Murphy, the team's communications specialist, whose skeptical glances told her he shared Bulldog's concerns. The mission parameters were daunting. They would be inserted by helicopter at a landing zone 8 miles from the target. From there, they would move on foot through treacherous mountain passes, establish observation posts, and wait for the right moment to strike. The entire operation was expected to take between 18 and 24 hours, depending on enemy activity and weather conditions. Weather reports indicate a storm system moving in from the northwest, said Lieutenant Marcus Prophet Johnson, the team's intelligence specialist. We'll have clear skies for the insertion, but conditions could deteriorate rapidly after that. Maria made notes as the briefing continued, her mind already shifting into the focused state she had cultivated through years of high-stress operations. She knew that earning the respect of these men would require more than just words. She would have to prove herself through action, and she was prepared to do exactly that. After the briefing ended, most of the team filed out in small groups, their conversations hushed but animated. Maria remained behind, studying the map and mentally rehearsing the route they would take. She was so absorbed in her preparation that she didn't notice Stone approaching until he cleared his throat. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "I want you to know that while some of the guys might have reservations, I'm willing to see what you're made of. But I need to ask you something straight up." Maria looked up from the map, meeting his steady gaze. "What's that, Chief?" "If this mission goes south, if we're taking heavy fire and someone goes down, can you handle dragging a 200-pound SEAL through 8 miles of mountain terrain?" The question hung in the air between them, and Maria understood that her answer would likely determine how the rest of the team viewed her. She could have given him statistics about her physical fitness scores or cited her combat record, but, instead, she chose a different approach. "Chief," she said, "I've been carrying men twice my size my entire career. The difference is, I've been doing it with bullets flying over my head. If someone on this team goes down, I'll get them home. That's not a promise, it's a guarantee." Stone studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I hope you're right, Sergeant. For all our sakes." As he walked away, Maria turned her attention back to the map. Tomorrow, she would step into the mountains with 11 men who questioned whether she belonged there. She knew that by the time they returned, there would be no more questions. One way or another, the mountains would reveal the truth about who she really was. The rest of the day passed in a blur of equipment checks, final briefings, and mental preparation. Maria spent hours reviewing the medical supplies she would carry, ensuring that every piece of equipment was positioned for maximum efficiency. She knew that in the chaos of combat, seconds could mean the difference between life and death. That evening, as the sun set behind the towering peaks that surrounded the base, Maria found herself standing alone on the perimeter, looking out at the mountains that would soon test everything she believed about herself. Tomorrow, she would discover whether years of training and determination would be enough to overcome the doubts of her teammates and the brutal reality of warfare in one of the most unforgiving places on Earth. The mission was set. The team was ready. And, somewhere in those distant mountains, fate was preparing to test the bonds that would either unite them as brothers in arms or tear them apart in the crucible of combat. The helicopter blades cut through the pre-dawn darkness like mechanical thunder, their rhythmic beating the only sound louder than Maria's pounding heart. She sat wedged between Bulldog and Ghost, her medical pack secured tightly to her back and her rifle held across her lap. Through the aircraft's small windows, she could see the jagged silhouettes of the Hindu Kush mountains growing larger with each passing minute. The insertion had been planned for 0400 hours, when darkness would provide maximum concealment but enough ambient light remained for safe navigation. Maria had slept fitfully the night before, her mind running through countless scenarios and contingencies. Now, as they approached the landing zone, she felt the familiar calm that always settled over her before a mission. Hawk's voice crackled through her headset. 2 minutes out. Remember, we go fast and we go quiet. Once we hit the ground, we have a 12-hour window before the weather turns nasty. Maria checked her watch. Everything was proceeding according to schedule. The intelligence reports had indicated minimal enemy activity in the insertion area, but, in these mountains, assumptions could be deadly. She had learned long ago to expect the unexpected. The helicopter began its descent, and Maria could feel the change in air pressure. At 9,000 feet, the thin air would make every step more challenging, every breath more precious. She had trained for this, acclimatized herself during weeks of preparation, but the mountains didn't care about human preparation. They demanded respect and punished the unprepared without mercy. Ghost leaned over and shouted above the rotor noise, "Stay close to the group, document. These mountains can swallow people up." Maria nodded, appreciating the advice even if it came wrapped in skepticism. She understood that each member of this team was looking out for the others in their own way, even if they weren't sure she belonged here. The landing was textbook perfect. The pilot set them down on a relatively flat area surrounded by towering peaks, and, within 30 seconds, the entire team was on the ground with their equipment. The helicopter disappeared into the darkness as quickly as it had arrived, leaving 13 soldiers alone in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Hawk immediately took charge, consulting his GPS and compass while the rest of the team formed a defensive perimeter. The silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of wind through the rocks and the distant call of some nightbird. Maria found herself acutely aware of every sound, every shadow, every potential threat. "Stone, take point with Chen," Hawk whispered. "Prophet and Diesel, you're on R6. Everyone else, standard formation. We move slow and quiet." The march began immediately. Maria fell into position in the middle of the formation, her medical pack adding an extra 40 pounds to her load. Within the first hour, she could feel the burn in her legs and the strain on her lungs, but she pushed forward without complaint. Around her, the SEALs moved with the fluid efficiency of men who had trained together for years. The terrain was every bit as challenging as advertised. They followed ancient goat paths along ridgelines that dropped away into black chasms on either side. Loose rock shifted under their feet with every step, threatening to send them tumbling into the abyss below. The darkness made everything more difficult, forcing them to rely on night vision equipment and careful placement of each footfall. After 3 hours of steady climbing, they reached their first waypoint, a small plateau that offered temporary respite from the treacherous path. Hawk called for a brief rest, and the team spread out to maintain security while catching their breath. Bulldog was breathing hard, his massive frame working overtime in the thin air. He glanced over at Maria, who was checking her equipment with methodical precision. Despite her smaller size, she showed no signs of distress from the demanding pace they had maintained. "You doing okay, Doc?" he asked, his tone lacking the hostility it had carried during the briefing. "Just fine," Maria replied quietly. "How are you holding up?" The question caught him off guard. It was the kind of concern a medic would naturally express, but, coming from someone he had dismissed as a liability just hours earlier, it carried unexpected weight. "I'm good," he said, but his tone had softened noticeably. Stone approached their position, consulting his map by the faint light of a red-filtered flashlight. "We're making good time," he reported to Hawk. "If we maintain this pace, we should reach the observation point by 0800. The next phase of the journey would take them along an exposed ridgeline where they would be vulnerable to observation from multiple directions. It was the most dangerous part of the approach, and everyone understood the risks involved. As they prepared to move out again, Tommy Chen pulled alongside Maria. Throughout the march, he had been quietly observing her performance, noting how she moved through the terrain and managed her equipment. As a sniper, he was trained to notice details that others might miss. "You've done this before," he said simply. "A few times," Maria replied, adjusting her pack straps. "Where?" "Mostly here in Afghanistan. A couple of operations in Pakistan, one in Tajikistan." Chen nodded approvingly. "Mountain work is different. Most people don't understand that." It was a small acknowledgement, but Maria recognized it for what it was. In the Brotherhood of Special Operations, respect was earned through demonstrated competence, and she was beginning to earn her place. The march resumed, and the terrain became even more challenging. They were now following a knife-edge ridge that required them to move single file, with deadly drops on both sides. The wind had picked up, adding another element of danger to their already precarious situation. Maria found herself directly behind Rick Diesel Murphy, the team's communications specialist. Despite his earlier skepticism, she noticed that he was unconsciously adjusting his pace to match hers, ensuring that she never fell behind or felt rushed. It was the kind of subtle teamwork that marked professional soldiers. As dawn began to break over the eastern peaks, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, the team reached their final approach to the observation point. The beauty of the sunrise was breathtaking, but none of them had time to appreciate it. They were now in potentially hostile territory, where a moment's inattention could prove fatal. Hawk held up his hand, signaling for the team to halt. Through his binoculars, he could see their destination, a small saddle between two peaks that would provide excellent observation of the target valley below. But getting there would require crossing 200 meters of open ground where they would be exposed to observation from multiple directions. "Stone, take Chen and do a recon of that crossing," Hawk whispered. "Everyone else, find cover and stay alert." As the two SEALs moved forward to scout the route, Maria found herself crouched behind a boulder next to Prophet Johnson. The intelligence specialist was studying the valley below through high-powered binoculars, searching for any signs of enemy activity. "See anything?" Maria asked quietly. "Negative," Prophet replied. "But that doesn't mean they're not there. These mountains have been hiding fighters for centuries." The recon team returned with good news. The crossing appeared clear, and they had identified a covered route that would minimize their exposure. Within minutes, the entire team was moving again, using natural cover and careful timing to reach their observation point undetected. The final position was perfect. Hidden among a cluster of large rocks, they had an unobstructed view of the target compound nearly a mile below. Through her binoculars, Maria could see the buildings where their target was believed to be hiding, the winding paths that provided access to the valley, and the numerous positions where enemy fighters might be concealed. Hawk set up his command post while the rest of the team established firing positions and security. Maria found herself assigned to a position between Bulldog and Ghost, where she could provide medical support to the entire team if needed. As they settled in for what could be a long wait, Maria couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed during their 8-hour approach march. The overt hostility she had faced during the briefing had evolved into something approaching professional respect. She hadn't proven herself yet, but she had demonstrated that she could keep up, follow orders, and contribute to the team's mission. But the real test was still to come. In the valley below, their target was conducting business as usual, unaware that 13 American soldiers were watching his every move. Soon, they would have to make their move, and, when they did, Maria knew that everything she had worked for throughout her military career would be put to the ultimate test. The mountains around them stood silent and imposing, ancient witnesses to countless conflicts throughout history. Today, they would witness another chapter in the ongoing war, and, by the time it was over, every member of the team would understand what it truly meant to be a soldier. The target compound lay spread out below them like a tactical puzzle waiting to be solved. For 6 hours, the team had maintained their observation post, watching through scopes and binoculars as life in the valley continued its seemingly normal rhythm. Children played in dusty courtyards while women hung laundry and men tended to livestock. To the casual observer, it looked like any other remote Afghan village, but intelligence reports indicated otherwise. Maria had spent the morning rotating between positions, checking on each team member and ensuring their medical readiness. The thin mountain air was taking its toll on everyone, and she had already treated 2 cases of mild altitude sickness with medication from her pack. More concerning was the weather. Dark clouds were building on the western horizon, and the wind had shifted direction twice in the past hour. "Storm's coming in fast," Prophet muttered, studying the satellite imagery on his encrypted tablet. "We've got maybe 4 hours before it hits, and, when it does, visibility will drop to near zero." Hawk acknowledged the warning with a grim nod. They had been hoping to wait until nightfall to make their move, but the approaching weather was forcing their hand. Through his high-powered scope, he had confirmed the presence of their primary target, Ahmad Pasha, moving between buildings in the compound below. "Chen, what's your assessment?" Hawk whispered into his radio. From his concealed sniper position 50 meters away, Ghost studied the compound through his rifle scope. "I count 12 military-age males, 4 of them armed with AK-47s. The target is currently in the main building, northeast corner. I have a clear shot if needed." "Negative," Hawk replied. "Intelligence wants him alive if possible. We go with the original plan, but we move now instead of waiting for darkness." The plan was straightforward in concept but complex in execution. Half the team would establish overwatch positions while the other half moved down into the valley to assault the compound. Maria would remain with the overwatch element, positioned to provide medical support to either group as needed. Stone began organizing his assault team, consisting of Bulldog, Diesel, and 2 other SEALs. They would approach the compound from the east, using a dry streambed for concealment. once in position, they would wait for Hawk's signal before beginning the assault. Remember, Hawk briefed the assault team, we want the target alive, but don't take unnecessary risks. If it goes sideways, eliminate the threat and get out. As the assault team prepared to move out, Maria conducted final medical checks on each member. She ensured that everyone had their individual first aid kits properly positioned and reviewed casualty evacuation procedures in case someone was wounded during the operation. "Doc," Bulldog said quietly as she checked his equipment, "if this thing goes bad, you stay with the Overwatch team. Don't try to be a hero." Maria met his eyes steadily. "If someone gets hurt down there, I'm coming to get them. That's not being a hero, that's doing my job." Something in her tone convinced him that arguing would be pointless. He nodded and checked his weapon one final time before beginning the treacherous descent toward the valley floor. The assault team moved with practiced efficiency, using the broken terrain to mask their approach. From her position, Maria could track their progress through her binoculars, noting how they flowed from cover to cover like water finding the path of least resistance. Everything was proceeding according to plan until Prophet's voice crackled urgently through their radios. "Hawk, we've got a problem. I'm seeing vehicle movement on the northern approach road. Looks like a supply convoy, for vehicles, approximately 20 personnel." Through her scope, Maria could see the dust cloud kicked up by the approaching vehicles. The timing couldn't have been worse. Stone's assault team was already committed to their approach, too far from cover to withdraw without being spotted. "Stone, be advised you have company coming," Hawk transmitted. "ETA approximately 10 minutes. "Copy," came Stone's terse reply. "We're too close to abort." Continuing with the mission. The next few minutes unfolded with agonizing tension. The assault team reached their final position just as the convoy arrived at the compound. Maria watched through her binoculars as armed men poured out of the vehicles, doubling the number of potential hostiles in an instant. "This is going to get ugly," Prophet muttered, adjusting his radio equipment to monitor enemy communications. Chen's voice came through their headsets, calm despite the deteriorating situation. "I count 8 tangos moving to defensive positions around the perimeter. Assault team, you've got 2 guards posted at your primary breach point." The original plan was rapidly becoming obsolete. What had been designed as a surgical strike against a lightly defended position was now shaping up to be a full-scale firefight against superior numbers in open terrain. Hawk made the decision that commanders dread but sometimes must make. "All elements, execute immediately. Stone, your weapons free." The assault began with Chen's sniper rifle speaking first, its suppressed bark barely audible from Maria's position. 2 enemy sentries dropped silently, never knowing what hit them. Seconds later, the assault team breached the compound wall, moving with the explosive violence that was the hallmark of special operations. For the first few minutes, everything went according to the new plan. Stone's team cleared 2 buildings methodically, encountering minimal resistance. Through her scope, Maria could see muzzle flashes and the distinctive movement patterns that indicated the assault was progressing successfully. Then, everything changed in an instant. A massive explosion erupted from the center of the compound, sending a fireball hundreds of feet into the air. The shockwave rolled across the valley like thunder, and Maria's heart dropped as she realized what had happened. The enemy had detonated a prepared explosive device, likely triggered when the assault team breached the main building. "Stone, report." Hawk's voice cut through the radio static, but there was no immediate response. Chen's scope was trained on the compound, searching for any sign of the assault team through the smoke and debris. "I see movement in the northeast corner," he reported. 2 figures, possibly friendly. Through her binoculars, Maria could make out shapes moving through the destruction, but the smoke and dust made identification impossible. What she could see clearly was muzzle flashes from multiple positions as enemy fighters who had survived the blast began to engage the assault team. "Diesel, this is Hawk, report your status," came another radio call. This time there was a response, but it wasn't what anyone wanted to hear. "Hawk, this is Diesel. We're pinned down in the northeast building. Bulldog is down, unconscious, possible internal injuries. Stone and Martinez are wounded but mobile. We need immediate medical support and extraction." Maria was already moving before Hawk could respond. She grabbed her medical pack and began the dangerous descent toward the valley floor, ignoring the shouts from her teammates behind her. "Santos, get back here." Hawk's voice carried clearly across the rocks, but Maria was beyond stopping. Somewhere in that chaos below, soldiers were wounded and needed her help. Everything else was secondary to that fundamental truth. The descent that had taken Stone's team nearly an hour to complete carefully, Maria covered in 20 minutes of controlled recklessness. She used every piece of natural cover available, but there were stretches where she had to expose herself to potential enemy fire to make progress. Bullets whined off the rocks around her as enemy fighters spotted her movement, but Maria pressed on, driven by the knowledge that every minute of delay could mean the difference between life and death for the wounded soldiers below. Chen's sniper rifle continued to speak from the overwatch position, each shot carefully placed to suppress enemy fire and cover Maria's advance. His accuracy was legendary for good reason, and multiple enemy positions fell silent under his precise fire. As Maria reached the edge of the compound, she could hear Diesel's voice directing defensive fire from inside the building. The explosion had collapsed part of the structure, creating a maze of debris that provided both cover and obstacles. "Diesel, this is Santos," she transmitted as she approached the building. "I'm coming in from the south wall. Don't shoot me. Copy, document. Thank God you're here. Bulldog is in bad shape." Maria low-crawled through a gap in the collapsed wall, her medical pack scraping against the debris. Inside, she found a scene of controlled chaos. Stone and Martinez were positioned at windows, returning fire while nursing their own wounds. Bulldog lay motionless against the far wall, his massive frame looking strangely fragile. A quick assessment revealed the severity of their situation. Bulldog had sustained a severe head injury from flying debris, along with what appeared to be internal bleeding. Stone had shrapnel wounds in his left arm and leg but was still functional. Martinez had a bullet wound in his shoulder that was bleeding heavily. The building shuddered as another explosion rocked the compound, and dust rained down from the damaged ceiling. Outside, the sound of gunfire was intensifying as more enemy fighters arrived from surrounding areas. Maria immediately went to work on Bulldog, checking his vitals and beginning treatment for his injuries. His pulse was weak but steady, and she could see signs of increasing intracranial pressure that needed immediate attention. "How bad is it, Doc?" Stone asked during a brief lull in the firing. Maria looked up from her patient, her face grim. "He needs a hospital, and he needs it now. We can't move him far in this condition." It was then that she realized the full scope of their predicament. They were surrounded by hostile forces, trapped in a partially collapsed building, with one critically wounded soldier and no clear route to extraction. The storm was approaching rapidly, which would ground any helicopter rescue attempt. But, as Maria looked at the wounded men around her, she felt the familiar calm that had carried her through countless emergencies. She had trained for situations exactly like this, and she would find a way to get these soldiers home alive. The real test was just beginning. The building shook again as enemy mortars began falling around the compound. Maria worked frantically over Bulldog's unconscious form, her hands steady despite the chaos erupting around them. She had managed to stabilize his vital signs temporarily, but his condition was deteriorating rapidly. Without proper surgical intervention, he would die within hours. "Santos, what's your assessment?" Hawk's voice crackled through her radio from the overwatch position. Maria glanced at Stone, who was grimly returning fire through a hole in the wall while blood seeped through the bandage on his arm. "Bulldog has severe traumatic brain injury with increasing pressure," she reported. "He needs immediate evacuation to a trauma center. The others are stable, but we can't stay here much longer." The truth was even worse than her report indicated. The building they were trapped in was slowly collapsing from the damage sustained in the explosion. Large sections of the roof had already fallen, and she could hear the ominous groaning of stressed support beams overhead. "Copy that," Hawk replied. "Prophet is calling for emergency extraction, but the storm front is moving faster than predicted. We may not have a window." Through the static, Maria could hear Prophet's voice coordinating with higher headquarters. The news wasn't good. The approaching weather system had intensified into a full mountain storm, with winds that would make helicopter operations impossible for at least 12 hours. Diesel crawled over to Maria's position, his radio crackling with enemy communications that he had managed to intercept. "Doc, it gets worse. I'm hearing chatter about reinforcements from 3 different directions. They know we're here, and they're moving to surround the entire valley." The tactical situation was rapidly becoming hopeless. They were outnumbered, trapped, and running low on ammunition. Even if Bulldog were healthy, fighting their way out would be nearly impossible. With him unconscious and critically injured, it seemed like a death sentence. Stone finished treating a fresh wound on Martinez's leg and crawled over to where Maria was working. His face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Doc, we need to talk." Maria looked up from her patient, already knowing what he was going to say. In the grim arithmetic of combat, hard choices sometimes had to be made to save as many lives as possible. "Don't say it," Maria said firmly. "We're not leaving him behind." "Listen to me," Stone said quietly, his voice barely audible over the sounds of gunfire. "Bulldog would understand. He'd want us to save whoever we can. If we try to carry him out, we all die." It was the kind of decision that haunted soldiers for the rest of their lives. In theory, the military's creed of leaving no one behind was absolute. In practice, commanders sometimes faced impossible choices where attempting to save one life meant losing many others. Maria had encountered this dilemma before, in other battles and other wars. She had seen good soldiers make the hardest decision of their lives, choosing to abandon wounded comrades to save the rest of their unit. She had also seen soldiers die attempting rescues that had no realistic chance of success. "How far to the extraction point?" she asked Stone. 8 miles, he replied grimly. "Straight up through mountain terrain that will test a healthy person on a good day. With this weather moving in and enemy forces converging on our position, it's barely possible for the walking wounded." Maria studied Bulldog's face, noting the subtle signs that indicated his condition was worsening. His breathing was becoming more labored, and his pulse was growing weaker despite her treatment. If they were going to move him, it would have to be soon, before he slipped beyond any possibility of recovery. But 8 miles through hostile mountain terrain while carrying an unconscious man would be a superhuman feat under the best of circumstances. With enemy forces pursuing them and a storm approaching, it bordered on the impossible. "Doc, you need to make a decision," Diesel said urgently. "Enemy fire is getting more accurate, and this building won't provide cover much longer." As if to emphasize his point, a section of wall near the front of the building crumbled under sustained machine gun fire. Chunks of stone and mortar crashed to the floor, and Maria could smell the acrid scent of explosives in the air. Chen's voice cut through their radio communications, calm but urgent. "All elements, be advised I'm observing at least 40 enemy fighters moving to surround your position. You have maybe 30 minutes before they complete the encirclement." Maria looked around at the faces of the men depending on her decision. Stone, wounded but still fighting. Martinez, losing blood but maintaining his position. Diesel, coordinating communications while protecting their flank. These were some of the military's best soldiers, and they were looking to her for leadership in an impossible situation. She thought about her training, her oath as a medic, and the promise she had made to Stone what seemed like a lifetime ago. She had sworn that if someone went down, she would get them home. Now that promise was being tested in the most extreme way possible. "Hawk, this is Santos," she transmitted. "I need you to prepare a route to the alternate extraction point. We're bringing everyone out." There was a long pause before Hawk's reply came through. "Santos, are you sure about this? That's 8 miles through enemy territory with a critically wounded soldier." "Roger that," Maria replied, her voice carrying a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "We're not leaving anyone behind." Stone stared at her in disbelief. "Doc, this is suicide. Even if we somehow manage to carry Bulldog 8 miles, what happens when we collapse from exhaustion halfway there?" Maria was already assessing their resources and planning the evacuation. "We'll take turns carrying him. We'll move during periods when the enemy fire slackens. We'll use the storm as cover once it hits." "And if he dies during the movement?" Martinez asked bluntly. "If all this effort is for nothing?" It was the question Maria had been asking herself since making the decision. The medical reality was that Bulldog had perhaps a 30% chance of survival even with immediate hospital care. Moving him through 8 miles of mountain terrain would reduce those odds significantly. "Then, at least we'll know he tried," Maria replied. "At least his family will know that his brothers in arms didn't abandon him." The building shuddered again as more explosives fell nearby, and Maria could hear the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds. They were running out of time to debate the decision. "All right," Stone said finally. "If we're going to do this insane thing, we need to move now. The longer we wait, the stronger the enemy cordon becomes.
Maria began preparing Bulldog for transport, fashioning a makeshift stretcher from equipment and debris. It was crude but functional, designed to distribute his weight between two carriers while protecting his injured spine. As she worked, Prophet's voice came through their radios with updated intelligence. The storm will hit your position in approximately 90 minutes. Wind speeds are expected to reach 60 miles per hour with near zero visibility. That's good news for concealment but bad news for movement. Diesel had been monitoring enemy communications, and his report was sobering. They're organizing search parties to sweep the entire valley. Once they complete their cordon, they'll start working inward. We need to be long gone before that happens. The plan that emerged was simple in concept but terrifyingly complex in execution. They would move during the chaos of the approaching storm, using the reduced visibility to mask their movement. The Overwatch team would provide covering fire and, then, leapfrog ahead to establish new positions. But, the heart of the plan rested on Maria's shoulders. She would have primary responsibility for keeping Bulldog alive during the 8-mile journey while helping to carry his weight through terrain that would challenge a pack mule. As they prepared to leave the relative safety of their shelter, Maria took one last look at Bulldog's unconscious face. He was a man who had questioned her presence on the team just days earlier, who had openly doubted her ability to handle the physical demands of the mission. Now, his life depended entirely on her determination to prove him wrong. The irony wasn't lost on any of them, but there was no time to appreciate it. Outside, the storm was approaching, enemy forces were closing in, and 8 miles of brutal mountain terrain waited between them and safety. The most difficult part of their mission was about to begin. The first drops of rain began falling as Maria and Stone lifted Bulldog's makeshift stretcher and prepared to leave their crumbling shelter. The unconscious seal weighed over 220 pounds, and even with the improvised carrying system, Maria could feel the strain immediately. But she had made her decision, and there was no turning back now. "Move fast and stay low," Hawk's voice crackled through their radios as Chen's sniper rifle provided covering fire. "Enemy patrols are converging on your position from 3 directions." The initial movement was the most dangerous. They had to cross 200 meters of open ground to reach the concealment of the rocky ridgeline, all while carrying a wounded man and dodging enemy fire. Maria felt bullets snap past her head as they stumbled across the uneven terrain, but she kept her grip firm on the stretcher handles. Stone was breathing hard, his earlier wounds sapping his strength, but he matched Maria's pace without complaint. Behind them, Diesel and Martinez provided rear security while the Overwatch team laid down suppressive fire from their elevated position. The first mile was a nightmare of loose rock and steep inclines. The stretcher was unwieldy on the narrow mountain paths, forcing them to navigate around obstacles that would have been simple for individual soldiers. Several times, they had to stop and lift Bulldog bodily over fallen trees or rocky outcroppings. "How's he doing, Doc?" Stone gasped during a brief rest behind a boulder formation. Maria checked Bulldog's pulse and breathing, noting the subtle changes that indicated his condition was worsening. "Still stable, but barely. We need to move faster." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. The same physical attributes that had made Bulldog doubt her capabilities, her small size and light weight, were now working in their favor. While the larger men struggled with the effects of altitude and exhaustion, Maria's efficient body mechanics and endurance training kept her moving steadily forward. As they crested the first major ridge, the storm hit with full fury. Wind gusts threatened to knock them off their feet, and the rain turned the already treacherous path into a slippery death trap. Visibility dropped to less than 50 meters, but Maria realized this was actually helping them evade the enemy patrols that were searching the valley below. "Prophet, what's our current position?" Hawk's voice was barely audible through the storm static. 2 miles from the extraction point, came the reply. "But I'm tracking at least 3 enemy search teams on parallel routes. They're trying to cut us off before we reach the pickup zone." Maria's world had narrowed to the next footstep, the next breath, the next few meters of rocky trail. Her shoulders ached from the constant strain of carrying the stretcher, and her legs burned from the continuous uphill climb. But Bulldog's weight had become a familiar burden, and she had found her rhythm. Stone was struggling more visibly now. His wounds were taking their toll, and the altitude was affecting him more severely than the others. During their brief rest stops, Maria could see him fighting to hide his weakness, but his deteriorating condition was becoming impossible to conceal. "Stone, let Martinez take your position for a while," Maria suggested during one stop.
I'm fine, Stone replied automatically, but his pale complexion and labored breathing told a different story. That's an order, Maria said firmly, using the authority that came with being the senior medical person on the team.
You're no good to anyone if you collapse.
The rotation helped, but it also highlighted how precarious their situation was becoming. They were now 6 hours into what should have been a 4-hour journey, and everyone was showing signs of exhaustion. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and enemy forces were still actively searching for them. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the terrain became even more challenging. They were now above the tree line, exposed to the full force of the wind and forced to navigate across fields of loose stone that shifted with every step. The stretcher became increasingly difficult to manage as the path narrowed to barely shoulder width in some places. It was during the 5th mile that disaster nearly struck. As they rounded a sharp turn in the path, Martinez lost his footing on the wet rocks. He went down hard, and his end of the stretcher tilted dangerously toward the edge of a 100-foot drop.
I've got him!
Maria shouted, throwing her full weight backward to counterbalance the stretcher.
For a terrifying moment, all three of them teetered on the edge of the cliff while loose rocks tumbled into the void below.
Diesel managed to grab Martinez and pull him back from the brink, but the near disaster highlighted how razor-thin their margin for error had become. One wrong step, one moment of inattention, and the entire rescue attempt would end in tragedy. Everyone take 5, Maria ordered, her heart still pounding from the close call.
Check your equipment and get some water.
As the team caught their breath, Chen's voice came through their radios with unwelcome news. Overwatch to ground team, I'm observing enemy movement approximately half a mile behind your position.
Looks like they've picked up your trail.
The pursuing enemy forces added a new dimension of urgency to their movement. They could no longer afford the luxury of careful rest stops or deliberate route planning. Speed had become more important than safety, a dangerous trade-off in terrain that punished the slightest mistake. The 6th and 7th miles blurred together into a continuous nightmare of pain and determination. Maria's world had narrowed to the most basic elements: breathe, step, carry, repeat. Her medical pack, which had seemed manageable at the beginning of the mission, now felt like it was loaded with stones. But she couldn't afford to abandon any of her equipment. Bulldog's life might depend on something in that pack. Stone had pushed himself beyond the limits of endurance, refusing to be relieved despite his obvious distress. His wounded arm was barely functional, but he maintained his grip on the stretcher through sheer force of will. Martinez and Diesel rotated positions regularly, but they were all showing signs of severe fatigue. It was during the 7th mile that Maria began to doubt whether they would make it. Bulldog's condition was deteriorating despite her continued medical interventions, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep him alive. Her own strength was beginning to fail, and she could see the same exhaustion in the faces of her teammates. But then, through the driving rain and howling wind, she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the distant beat of helicopter rotors.
All elements, this is Rescue 1, came the voice of their extraction pilot. I have you on GPS and am inbound to the pickup zone.
Be advised, I have about a 10-minute window before weather conditions force me to abort.
The promise of salvation gave them the strength for one final push.
They covered the last mile in record time, driven by the knowledge that rescue was within reach. As they crested the final ridge, they could see the lights of the helicopter circling the extraction zone, its crew chief already preparing for their arrival. The pickup itself was a masterpiece of precision flying. The pilot held his aircraft steady in winds that would have grounded most aircraft, while the crew chief and Maria worked together to load Bulldog into the helicopter's medical bay. Within minutes, they were airborne and heading toward the military hospital where trauma surgeons were waiting. As the helicopter climbed away from the mountains, Maria finally allowed herself to believe that they had succeeded. Bulldog was still alive, still fighting, and still had a chance at recovery. The men who had questioned her presence on the team were now looking at her with undisguised respect and admiration.
Doc, Bulldog whispered weakly as consciousness briefly returned during the flight, did we get the bastard?
Maria smiled and squeezed his hand.
Yeah, we got him. But, more importantly, we got you out of there.
I was wrong about you, he said quietly.
Wrong about everything.
Just focus on getting better, Maria replied. We've got plenty of time to argue about it later.
3 weeks later, Bulldog would walk out of the hospital under his own power, his recovery nothing short of miraculous.
The target they had been sent to capture provided intelligence that led to the disruption of multiple terrorist operations. But, for Maria, the most important victory was simpler: she had kept her promise to bring everyone home. The story of the petite female soldier who carried a wounded SEAL 8 miles through enemy territory became legend within the special operations community. But, for those who were there, who witnessed Maria's determination and courage firsthand, it was more than a story. It was proof that heroism comes in all sizes, and that the heart of a warrior can beat just as strongly in someone who barely reaches your shoulders.
The mountains of Afghanistan had tested them all that day.
But, in the end, they had learned that the strongest person in their unit wasn't the one who could lift the most weight or run the fastest mile. It was the one who refused to leave anyone behind, no matter what the cost.